And welcome to Architecture at the Edge. This evening's talk is entitled Breaking Boundaries, Nightclubbing and the Architectures of Inclusion. I'm joined by Rachael Young. Rachael is an award-winning artist and writer based between London and Nottingham. Her interdisciplinary performance practice exists on the boundaries between live art, dance, contemporary theatre, and socially engaged projects. Her work creates spaces for intersectional realities to be explored and celebrated, and for alternative narratives and forms to evolve and to be heard. Also joining us in conversation is Rory O'Neill, aka Panti Bliss, who many of us watching will be very familiar with as the Queen of Ireland, is one of the titles. Also host of Pantisocracy on Radio 1, which covers many current issues, which very similar to what we're exploring tonight, that those of inclusion or exclusion, whichever that might be. Welcome everybody. I'm going to come to you first, Rachael, and perhaps you can introduce us and expand a little bit on how I described your practice and the kind of performances that you would use to communicate that type of engagement.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for sharing this online space with me today. I would say it's nice to see everyone, but I can't see everyone and you can see, so I mean, nice to imagine who's out there. Yeah, I'm Rachael. I'm a performance artist, originally from Nottingham, and I kind of make work between Nottingham and London at the moment. It's interesting being asked to take part in this discussion, or it's kind of sometimes been like fronted as maybe a lecture, and I was thinking, oh, how do I feel about that? And I guess like maybe I have a stickiness around that particular term because it seems to infer that like somebody has like more knowledge or is an expert on a subject than another person, and I guess I feel like that to me there's a sense of like a power imbalance. Yeah, and so this space today I'd kind of like to have like, you know, chat, and it can kind of be informal and a place where everyone feels like feels able to like speak their truth. So what I'd like to do just before we start is for everyone to like close their eyes for a moment. Thanks, there she is, artist being an artist. I'm going to have you pretending to be a tree in a moment. No, not really. I feel like there's something about connections that is like lacking or missing for us at the moment, just because of the way things are. So we're just going to take a moment to check in with ourselves. So if everybody kind of like in their own time just like takes a breath in and then a breath out, and just kind of let that go. It's kind of a sigh out, so we'll just do that again. Breath in and a sigh out. Okay, and now we're just going to do little raindrops. You can keep your eyes closed or you can open them to see what I'm doing and then close them again. These are little raindrops, just little raindrops on your forehead. I don't know about you, but it is raining here too today, so but these feel nice, just to kind of like check back in with the face, connecting back in with ourselves, and then those raindrops can go onto your cheekbones, and then on your cheeks, and then on your chin, and then if you take your hands just underneath where you're like just below your earlobes and just kind of give your face a little bit of a massage there and get into that jawline. My jaw is always so tight. I only ever realize this when I'm like poking myself in the face. Probably because I talk too much. That's it. Just give your face a little bit of a massage around the crevices of your nose. That feels great. Okay. Cool, and when you feel ready, you can kind of like open your eyes. I definitely feel more connected with myself. I've been running around this week, moving house, it's been terrible. But here I am, ready to go.
Already my favorite lecture ever.
So let's for a moment. I must say that I borrowed that little thing from somebody else. That's not my my little warm up exercise, but I really, really liked it. I think like I operate in here quite a lot, and that just kind of centers me and gets me back into my body. Anyway, so let's just come back to thinking about power imbalance for a moment. And I guess like when people ask me why I do what I do, or what as an artist and what work I make, I often think about the idea of having a power in imbalance, or it's really funny that probably anybody's been asked this if they're an artist. Like when they're younger, my parents always used to be like, when are you going to get a proper job? And I'm like, well, why isn't being an artist a proper job? Why is that not a worthwhile thing to spend your time doing? And I guess for me that feels a lot to do with like maybe like capitalism and this idea of monetary wealth, and that kind of being rich monetary in it than anything else, and maybe that's why it's not seen, it doesn't feel like a proper job. And I guess like when I think about being an artist, often it puts me in a weird place in terms of power, because in one respect, artists are kind of like revered for being able to do this thing. And in another respect, if you want to even rent a property as an artist and you're self-employed, you can't do that. So it's just like a kind of weird juxtaposition to kind of be in. I think like that power imbalance is something that's at the heart of like my practice. And I've really only realized that recently. And I think like I'm trying to carve out a space or use my creative space as an opportunity for the little guy to speak. And in this particular moment, or for me, the little guy is Black people or people of colour or any queer people or anyone from the LGBTQIA community. Often we don't have very much power. We're always being dictated to, and we don't, along with that power is also the fact that we don't have very much space. And I guess my work seeks to like blend and break through and dismantle those boundaries that are often invisible to some of us, but very, very visible for others. And I believe that maybe that's what I was trying to do when I started to make this work, Nightclubbing. So Nightclubbing is an interdisciplinary performance. And it has myself in it and two other really amazing musicians, queer musicians. And it felt important to me that those musicians were queer, and it felt important to me that those musicians were Black. I started to kind of think about the concept for this work in 2015, actually, when there was a kind of news report of these two Black women being denied access to a club space in London. And I guess naively, for me, I still was in a place where, coming from a small town like Nottingham and being in a bigger city like London, I felt like this was a place where you could be your authentic self. And I guess that's why this particular thing hit me so hard. I was really struck by the idea that we are policing people's bodies and also policing the space in which people are allowed to enter. Surely everyone after a long week deserves the right to be able to have a few drinks with their friends and kick back and relax. But apparently this was not so, or it would be possible if you looked a certain way, which brings me back to kind of like these ideas that have been with me since childhood about like who is desirable and what beauty is. And these are kind of like set ideas, like Western ideas of beauty. I guess so I'm grappling with all of these things, and I'm thinking about the fact that I identify with these women because they were darker skinned Black women, and I am that myself. And it just felt like this thing was very, I guess, like very, very gendered, and subjective. So I then started to think about who is there that kind of like exists in the world, maybe somebody from popular culture that I feel like looks like me, and it needed to be somebody that wasn't like overtly femme, because I don't think that should be another precursor as to whether you should be able to enjoy yourself on a night out or not. And I remember kind of going through your Beyoncés and other people that I would instantly go to, and they didn't seem right. And then I thought about like Grace Jones, because there were similarities in terms of skin tone and background, that her family are from Jamaica, and part of my family are also from Jamaica. And what I really, really love about Grace Jones is that she has ability to kind of blur the boundaries between gender, and that is totally okay. And she's one of the few people that that I remember when I was growing up that were able to do that. And I think as a young Black girl, it's really important to see people like that, to show you that you can be different, that like these identities are not set. And of course, so I'm like, Grace Jones, I then started listening to her back catalogue of music, and read loads about her, and looked at just her work throughout the decades, and really felt like akin to this person. Like there was this strength that she had that I wanted to kind of like embody. And then when I was listening to her music, I found an album that was that's called Nightclubbing, and I was like, it's a sign, here it is. So so I guess like I wanted to kind of look at Grace Jones's like rise to stardom, and also the very kind of like, and juxtapose that with this very kind of real basic need of wanting to go out on a night out. And that's kind of how the show was born, and also kind of like riffing off Grace Jones's music. And one thing that I thought about when I see her perform is not only kind of that gender thing that she's not afraid to play with, especially as a Black woman, because there's a trope of the angry Black woman, but she's not afraid of that. She leans into it, I feel like, even further. And I know that often as a Black person, I feel afraid to stand up or say something because against an injustice or something that I feel that isn't right, because instantly I'll be told, oh, you're just being angry, or you're just being aggressive, which immediately kind of like silences you. I also really wanted to play in the work with space and ownership of space. I think that like female bodied people tend to make themselves small in spaces instead of trying to take up as much space as possible. So within the work, I'm playing with the idea of micro and macro, and how I can be both small and fragile and huge, and all of the things that I'm not supposed to be. Loud, angry. This is a space for all of those things within the work. I feel like that's.
Thanks, Rachel. That was fascinating. I'm going to ask Panti to come back in and, I suppose, give his story about his, reasons for getting into performance, and that sort of perhaps finding something that was the key to unlocking the way in for him.
Well, I should probably first just name drop here and say I met Grace Jones, and she's tiny.
Oh, yeah?
That was the thing, because her image is so big and powerful. I expected her to be my height, and she's like tiny. And she was a delight. She'll be glad to hear. Well, my my thing to performance was, you know, I'm one of those people. I'm always on in a way, and but I was drawn to the drag thing because of its transformative power, which I think is something similar to what Rachael was talking about. You know, you know, the Panti me is a, you know, is a projection of a more powerful me that isn't bounded by the same rules that Rory has to go by. And so to me, it's just another way to express another side of me, you know. But what struck me most about Rachel's thing there was what sparked it off about, you know, being allowed into a club space. Because for me, the reason that I, you know, got into all the stuff that I got into is because for me, nightclub spaces were, you know, literally in a way life-saving. I mean, I grew up in 1970s Ireland, and I was like in college pre-decriminalization. So there were no gays on the TV, and there were no gays on my street, and nobody knew where the gay meeting places were. They were all totally hidden in underground spaces. And in Dublin's case, they were mostly literally underground. They were usually in the basements of, you know, those Georgian houses in town. And the ones that I did eventually discover, I had passed them thousands of times in my daily life, having no idea that that is where all the queers are meeting. And so the queer spaces were entirely divorced, entirely separate from, you know, the regular world in that era in Ireland, and which is so dramatically different to now, where everybody's grandmother can tell them where the big gay bars are, you know, and they have big open plate glass windows, and, you know, they're famous. But when I was a college student, just to find other queer people was a huge, you know, adventure. I mean, you had to be sort of Angela Lansbury just to find another queer person, and because they weren't known, you know, gay spaces. And when I did find them, and they were in these basements, to me, they were also very radical spaces, because not only were they hidden, and therefore, you know, finding them was difficult, but in order at that time to get to the point where you were going to cross the threshold, you know, go out searching for them, find them, and then cross the threshold into these places, you had to reach a point where you were basically saying, fuck all of that, that all of this, you know, the real world I've decided is bullshit, because I can't find a place for me in it. It's never going to be a place where I can make a home in, sort of. So you were necessarily quite radicalized by the time you got to the threshold of a queer bar. And it's now the way I sort of think of it, sort of, I didn't at the time, but I think of it a bit like, do you know, I hate to bring up J.K. Rowling, but do you know when Harry Potter gets the letter from Hogwarts at the beginning, and he suddenly, this whole other world is revealed to him that's coexisting but utterly hidden. And that's how I feel gay spaces used to be, because we'd be in these basements, you know, in the city centre of Dublin, you know, with bottles of poppers dancing to the Pointer Sisters, while, you know, on the pavement above us, literally on the pavement above us, you know, the muggles were going to work, you know, with no idea that we were down there. And the people who were down there were almost necessarily radical, because they'd had to get to that point in order to find this space and to join it. So the people and the ideas and the ways of making yourself happy or finding a happiness were quite radical at the time, much more radical than young queer people are now. You know, there was, you know, lesbians living in communes and, you know, all that stuff, because necessarily we had to find other ways to be happy, because all the normal stuff, your marriages and your good jobs at the banks and all that, were denied to us. I mean, it was not possible to have a good job at the bank and be a queer in Ireland in 1981. And so, to me, those spaces, which were hidden and small and dark and unappreciated, were, to me, you know, freeing and liberating and glorious and colorful and exciting. And so without them, I definitely wouldn't be the person I am now. And they're definitely necessary. They were necessary for me then, and I think they're still necessary for queer people now. And so to be denied, and in a town like Dublin where there aren't that many queer spaces, if you are denied entry to them, your life is boxed because you can't meet the other queer people anywhere else. And you had mentioned about the COVID thing briefly earlier. That is interesting now because while for straight people, it's a pain in the ass, you can't go to your local bar. For gay people, it's often, it's much bigger than that. Because queer spaces, bars and that, are much more than a bar to the queer community. They're community centers, they're your bingo club, they're your, where your friends hang out, they're much more to the queer community. They're much more central to queer life, those spaces, than they are to, let's call them the straight world, yeah. That was quite rambling and all over the place, but you get where I'm going.
So, so I think from what I'm hearing from both of you is that there's sort of there's a correlation between with urban life and the physical and social transformation of queer space is influenced by the social relation of inclusion which you found within the cities. Rachel, you were talking about sort of this power imbalance, and Rory, you were talking about, it's radical, it was radical, and maybe you don't think so as much now?
I think it's much less radical.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I think certainly from the Irish experience, when we were having our big boom, younger queer people became very not unradical because they didn't have to reject everything anymore in order to find, their queer selves. Because people bring their mother to the bingo show on a Sunday in the George, which on one hand I think, oh, that's great, isn't it? But on the other hand, I think, fuck no, your mother's not meant to be here. And I think young people in general, and queer people are no exception, they became quite comfortable during those 90s boomy years, and they just wanted to drink Bacardi Breezes. But then, when the crash happened and all that, and I think now, especially too, with all the other social issues that have come to the fore, I think they have become more radical than they used to be again, which I'm delighted to see. But of course, it's interesting because the internet has had a massive effect there. It has re-radicalized them in some ways by bringing global issues of inequalities and Black Lives Matter and all these other things into their lives. But on the other hand, it's also separated them from each other much more because they're all online on apps nowadays. They instead of going to the bar and meeting, you're gay. When I was a young gay man, I went to the bar to get laid, but in doing that, I was hanging out with lesbians and transgender people, and all the older people, old queers and young queers, because we were all thrown in together, and it made you much more aware communally. Whereas now, I think if you want to get laid and you're 20 years old, a queer boy, you sit at home on your sofa on Grindr, and you filter out anybody who's over 30 or so these things have the internet has changed everything. Here we are talking to each other on the internet about spaces, and we're not, we're only in a virtual space. So all of those things have a huge effect. But queer spaces are still important, and I think always will be. And as the city changes, it becomes harder and harder to hang on to the ones we have, I think.
Yeah, because the nightlife kind of venues are sort of disappearing as it's sort of the nighttime economy and that kind of thing. I'm going to come back to Rachael because, I suppose the precursor to having this conversation was about that, some social economies are built into our cities, or they're not designed for everyone. The Black Lives Matters showed that there's sort of systematic, racism within society. It's there, it exists. That there is still a need for this sort of radical action, these revolutionary kind of actions. People were protesting on the streets at the height of the COVID crisis. what has changed, do you think, Rachel? I mean, do you think from where you were coming from, what inspired, you know, the Grace Jones inspired sort of nightclub thing, and what's happened recently, has that sort of made you reevaluate that again, or because
I don't know that I think anything has changed as such, because I think change takes a long time to happen. I think that, like, the slowing down in pace of the world generally meant that things that would normally not be seen by the general population were then pushed to the forefront, because people were furloughed and at home, or people had lost jobs and things. And so everything kind of culminated in that particular moment for people to be like, oh yes, oh dear, this there's some stuff happening within our world, within our communities, that's not right, and we need to try and fix it. I guess, like, I was sitting there with bated breath, hoping that this would be a real moment for us to kind of shift and move forward in a different way. And I think, whilst I don't think, you know, some things have happened, particularly, you know, within the arts, people are thinking a lot more about representation, and who they work with and why they work with those people and how they can do better, because I think it's been highlighted that they definitely need to. But I still think we're a long way off, and I feel like probably not in my lifetime will we get to a point where things are maybe different and more fair, unfortunately. And that's, I guess, like, at the beginning of COVID, that was something that I felt really sad about. Like, I looked at the world and I saw so many injustices for so many different people, and it made me feel like, what is the point? Why can't things? Because for me, it feels very, very simple to be like, let's allow transgender people to live the way they want to live, and non-binary people to live the way they want to live. Like, where, like, this makes absolutely no sense to me to, like, wish ill or hate another person just because of their choices, especially when it doesn't affect me. But obviously, I don't necessarily. People have a different worldview, and, you know, and I feel like for those particular people, COVID has had a serious impact on people's mental health and well-being, because, you know, like Panti said, you might not even want to go out, but you drag yourself out because you know that that's where you feel safe and you feel seen, and where you can get to meet your friends and make new friends. And those spaces, well, because nightclubs can't really be open, they've gone for some people. And, you know, just the other day, I heard of a trans black trans person dying, you know, and I guess this is happening over and over again, because the systems that are in place now, they've always been unfair, but we just haven't. The light has really been shone on them. So it's up to us as a society to think about, like, how we can change and try and make things better for all people. And so I do still think that the work is relevant. I was thinking as we were talking that I have, like, these two shows are very much about, like, centre night clubbing spaces. Both of them. There's another show called Out and this other and Nightclubbing. And it is the space of, like, freedom, isn't it? Like, you know, you can dance for hours on the nightclub, on the dance floor, and you will meet and talk to people that you wouldn't normally encounter out in real life. And for that, like 4 or 5 hours or whatever, everybody is kind of like come together for this like collective transcendent energy, a transformational energy, you know. And so to not have that at the moment is, feels really, really difficult.
It's like there was always talk about, well, safe space, I suppose. And I mean, you know, it's all very well to have apps and that kind of thing, but you still have to venture out, you know. But we're not going to stay. You know, we have been confined and we've been restricted. And, you know, this sort of lack of contact or intimacy that we've all been experiencing is very, very difficult. You know, where we can't embrace each other or whatever it is, and there is something, you know, even meeting or talking over the internet, it's not quite the same sort of. You know, we can't see each other. We can read each other's faces and that kind of thing. But within us, you know, those kind of environments you're talking about, they're very. So you're going to say?
Yeah, I think I want to kind of just like talk about Soho in London just for a moment, and like how that, you know, I'm not old enough to have known what it was like very many, many years ago, but I can believe that it was a very different space from what it is now. And that's supposed to be like a queer space in London, and has been for very many, many, many years. And recently, well, in COVID, it transformed because there were tables and chairs out in the street, and it became like a no car zone, so like a pedestrian area. And I walked around. I mean, obviously I can't tell exactly who's queer and who's not, but I really felt like, oh, this is interesting. So now it's not enough that you have every other space to go to, but now you've taken over this space as well. And I think that some of those spaces, it's like what you said, Patty. It's like, yes, okay, bring your mum. It's nice that your mum accepts you. That's really, really great. But your mum doesn't need to be in those spaces, because there are many other spaces for your mum to go into. And some people actually need that. It's like life or death. And I think that is the difference. That is the difference. And that is why those spaces are really, really radical. If you cannot be yourself anywhere else, and this is the one place once a week that you get to do that, then no, everybody shouldn't be able to come in. Because, you know, the last thing anybody needs is a load of drunk people on a hen night pulling or jabbing at your clothes or hair or any of those things. Like, that's not okay.
Well, it's funny because I remember, you know, being 19 and going to Soho the first time in my life, and, you know, being, you know, that up until that point, I'd only ever been in a queer space that was like a one-room club or something. But to be realized there was streets, and, you know, the gayness was all around you in the air, and everything was, you know, aimed at you. It was an incredible experience. And of course, it's one that straight people have every day of their lives. But I'd never experienced that until going to Soho in whatever year it was. And so to me, you know, because Soho is not such a queer space anymore. And part of me thinks, oh, that's kind of great because queerness is more integrated into the whole of London. But on another hand, I miss it, and I want my ghetto sometimes.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's really hard to make a decision between normativity and sitting on the edge, or the boundaries between those spaces, and do they need to still exist or not? And, you know, many of these, you know, obviously the amount of money that maybe they would have made by making the whole area just a pedestrian only area, it comes back to this idea of like, it's like money, always money over people. So, you know, it's prime spot, so it probably will not, I mean, there's very few places there anymore. yeah, so it won't be long before that's totally gone. And I feel like the queer spaces and your community centres and your libraries and all those things are always like the first things to go in the honour of redevelopment / gentrification. Yeah.
Do you think that there's been an element of queer culture bringing that sort of vibrancy? You talk about gentrification. That it's a bit like the artists move in, the queers move in, and it's only a matter of time before the developer moves in.
Yeah.
Have we noticed this in Dublin or in?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Temple Bar used to be just a place for artists and queers. And then we made it acceptable, and then everybody else moved in and we get pushed out. That happens all the time. And you see it in smaller part, like what in Dublin the gays know it as the Gayborhood, Dublin 8. They've done that there too. That happens all the time, all over the world. So that's a well-worn path. You see it everywhere from San Francisco to Shanghai. Even I was there recently, and it was the same story there. Which it's one of those things. You want progress, and it's we do to ourselves in some way. We move in and make the houses nice and put out flower pots, and then that attracts developers. So it's a never-ending evolution. I have to say though, London has been better than Dublin has at trying to protect its queer spaces. London has a nightlife czar, Amy Lame, and they take nightlife and the nightlife industry seriously. They have protected the Vauxhall Tavern, one of the most famous gay venues. And in other instances where developers moved in and were taking over a block, they were forced to commit to, if they were going to knock down that block, that when they rebuilt it, they included in the plan had to be a new queer bar to replace the one that they were taking out. And that you can't even imagine that discussion even happening here. So in that respect, I think London has made some advances beyond where we are. I mean, in Ireland, nightlife and night work isn't appreciated at all. It's seen as an annoyance and a nuisance, something to be controlled, and the sort of the wider effects of nightlife from the cultural effects and the economic effects that aren't appreciated at all. I mean, I think most Irish governments would just prefer if we didn't have a nighttime economy at all. So I think we need to catch up there. And London has made a ton of big mistakes too, but that's one area where they seem to be beginning to get it right.
Do you think, I mean, to both of you, I suppose, I mean, Rachel, you spoke about the performance sort of being empowering, I suppose, and to, that you're making a kind of it's a, and then Panti, you talked about being a projection of yourself. I mean, if these spaces don't exist, how are you going to express yourself? Or, where are you going to find that space? Or, how do you inhabit that? If this situation continues, or how do you think that might adapt? Or are you concerned?
I feel like the younger queers in London are really good at creating their own spaces, so they carve it out. Like, I guess, Soho exists, but I still feel like maybe certain people would not feel comfortable or welcome in those spaces, and because of this, they just carve out their own nights. They get DIY and have a venue and do their own thing. I guess, but still, even though that happens, the queer identity is still co-opted and rebranded and sold back to itself, which is something that's very, very strange. But I guess it's different for me because I say different in the way that, like, maybe I've put my dancing shoes down and they only come out occasionally, because I don't necessarily feel the most comfortable in spaces surrounded by lots of people always. So I can kind of like have, it's different if you have a community. So I have a community of friends and people that I can spend time with. That doesn't have to be in the clubs. It's for people that are living or kind of feeling quite isolated, that really, really need those spaces. But I think that, like, people are adaptable, and I feel that they will always find a way to gather. And if that means that, it's much like, it's funny what you were saying, you know, Patty, because kind of these underground spaces or disused spaces, or these spaces that used to exist a long time ago, I feel like that is kind of what like younger people are doing right now, just like finding a venue, finding a building and making their own thing. When they don't see a space for themselves, they just carve one out. And I think there's maybe something in that, like, we need to stop trying to wait for people to make space for us and make our own spaces, you know?
Yeah, my concern, of course, now though, is with all the COVID business, you know, when are we going to be allowed to use spaces and gather properly again? You know, at the moment, like here, I don't. Here, there's a real finger wagging thing at young people. You know, where young people are gathering, and look at all those students in Galway and all that. And I don't have too much time for all this shaming of young people. I mean, I think older people forget what it's like to be 20. I mean, you know, going out and meeting your friends was your life when you were 20. And I would be afraid to imagine what kind of adults you end up with if you take all that away from young people. Young people want to go out and meet other young people. So, you know, should they be doing it at the moment in the COVID world? No, bad kids. But I'm not going to be the one acting horrified and shocked. Young people will do what young people do. And I think if we are seriously looking at, you know, a long term having to deal with this, the answer cannot be young people can never hang out again in groups. I mean, the idea that you're going to force, you know, teenagers to never know what it's like to hang out, you know, to be at a party, to never hang out in a group, to never, you know, go dancing together. To me, that's unthinkable. And I don't want to live in that world. Give me the COVID.
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, you can't be blaming. You can't be pointing the finger. I feel like I could point the finger, but that's not necessarily where I would point it.
Well, and you know, and you had asked Frank about, you know, how else could performers, you know, get into do things. And people have really tried and been really creative about using all the technology and doing online gigs and events and all sorts. And I've been really impressed with some of them. I mean, I know some like young drag queens, and the next thing I know, they're having online shows that are bringing in people from other countries to do their bits and everything. And I'm, you know, this is impressive, but it's not the same. And it's never going to be the same as being in a room with a live, sweating, breathing, panting, you know, makeup dripping performer in front of you, while you're feeling the energy of that and feeling the energy of the people beside you, and you know, feeling the bass on the, you know, through the floorboards and all that. That cannot be replaced by this, as delightful as this is. This is not going to replace that. So you know, there isn't a replacement for that live experience. And I know that theaters and all sorts have been making so many efforts and social distancing, and you know, I see the photographs online. Look, we're about to open. Look at all the stuff we've done, the National Theatre in London and so on. And great, try everything you can, but it's never going to be the same experience to go and sit in a room where the nearest audience member to you is, you know, 2 meters away in their separate bubble, and all of that stuff. It's not the same. So, you know, I admire that people are trying to find all these ways through it. But I can't kid myself that that's ever going to replace the communal experience of a live performance. And if this is going to continue on for you know, and an indefinitely long period of time, we need to have a serious conversation about that, or a serious think about that. I don't think that that is something small that we should just toss out glibly.
Yeah, we've all been a little bit sort of excluded. You know, we've all been sort of turned away at the door a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You probably, you know, within your life, on many occasions, or know people, you know, that have had those kind of experiences. But we're I think the whole of society is finding that now. And what you describe, Rory, it's, you know, it's very vital to kind of the life of cities, but it's also very vital to how we relate to each other. I mean, that's what attracts us to these places. It's about that opportunities to meet, to exchange, to interact, to, you know, get a bit, you know, exuberant and enjoy, you know, just enjoy being alive. And we've all been kind of shackled, and the fact that these things are also being removed, I suppose that there has been this big appraisal from everyone, I think, about what to be valued, what's the value in these things. And, you know, we have slowed down, we have had a chance to take a look. I mean, I invited you both on to participate in this because I've admired the work that you've done, and, you know, the sort of approach that you've both taken to sort of take on issues about, you know, empowerment, or, you know, and being a bit radical, and, you know, just being yourselves, you know. But I wonder, you know, I kind of feel that you have, you know, artists usually help us in these times to interpret these sort of situations that we're in, and find a way through them. If you don't have the spaces to do that, if it's just going to be virtuous, that makes it very, very difficult.
Yeah.
So I kind of wonder, you know, we're coming kind of close to the end of the time, but I will invite people to ask questions. But where do you have you been thinking about what to do next? I mean, where do we go from here? If you're going to, you know, even if you occasionally put on the shoes, Rachael, because, you know, you know, have you been thinking about how, you know?
I mean, I've managed. Obviously, you know, we're not supposed to gather, so a lot of the time the gathering is done outside. Although the weather now, I think this is a thing. Before, when it was summertime, it was easier because I just spent a lot of time in the parks and really, really appreciated that. Like I didn't feel the loss of the spaces so much then. I felt the loss of like my community and my friends, but I didn't feel the loss of the spaces so much because we had the outdoors, and so we would just kind of be together outside, and that was really, really nice. I worry about now, I guess, like I hope that maybe we'll be able to gather in a few more numbers, or I really don't know, because I did the whole, at the beginning of COVID, the whole online party business, and I'm not dancing around my living room or my bedroom by myself is really not for me. Pretending to be having a great old time, it's really not. It's weird. It's weird for me. So I don't really want to be doing that again. Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily have the answers, because I guess a lot of it, and I feel, you know, it is a leveler. This has been a leveler. Everybody is trying to kind of like navigate this new normal. Well, this is normal now, right? I guess for me, it's just important for me to like keep in contact with those people that feel important to me. And even though it can be quite isolating, I think, the worst thing is not being able to speak to people, or not being able to see people. Maybe I'll do some like one-on-one dancing in the street parties with my mates. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not really sure.
I'm there. Yeah. Rory, we'll give you the last word on this.
You know, in some ways, you know, so I'm very much tied, you know, my life is sort of performing, and then I have the bar. and both of those things have just ended. So, you know, there's this whole sort of thing about we're all in this together, and then that annoys me because I kind of be like, no, actually, we're not all in this together, because, you know, so many other people I know, they had to deal with some social, you know, limits to their social lives and that, but things have continued on quite as normal in many ways. Some of them have just lost their commute and they were happy to do that anyway. But so it's forced me to really like think, well, what happens, you know, beyond this? And I don't know. If we're just going to sit here waiting constantly, we're not going to have any culture or nightlife or communal spaces to go back to, because they won't be there afterwards. I'm sure even this morning I see that the Cineworld chain is closing. That's you know, that's, I mean, that's pretty massive.
Yeah.
So I think people haven't quite clicked yet that all of these things will disappear, unless there's some plan to save them, or we at least have a grown-up conversation about what's going to happen. I can't see any theatre surviving in a socially distanced world. Theatres struggle to survive anyway. Live performance struggles to survive anyway. And if you're going to say that they have to now struggle to survive in a world where you can't have an audience, or, you know, your audience has to be reduced you know, dramatically, you won't survive. And so I don't think the public has had this conversation yet, because there's this vague feeling like, oh, it'll surely be over next month. And I think the longer it goes on, the longer we're seeing that that's not actually going to be the case. So I think we need to start the really grown-up conversation. And I don't think we've had it yet. I think people still think, sure, in a couple of weeks we'll all be back to normal, and that's not happening.
It's difficult because I'm not sure if we sort of petered out, because we all feel a little bit, you know, low some days, you know, perhaps because it's Sunday afternoon, that it's hard to be optimistic about some of these things. But, you know, I mean, performers like yourselves, you have reinvented yourselves. You continue to reinvent yourselves. We all do. We all have to adapt and change, and we all grow. And I really do wish you both every success in the future. And I want to thank you very much for joining in this conversation today. And
nice to talk
wish
to
you the well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Take care, folks.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.